At the bottom of Texas, where the Rio Grande carves the border between two countries, hot water rises out of the desert floor. It comes up at 105 degrees, filling the stone foundation of a bathhouse that has stood on this riverbank for more than a century. A man once staked his whole life on this spring, sight unseen, because he believed it could cure him. Today we are walking the short trail that leads to it, past the ruins of the tiny settlement he built. This is Langford Hot Springs, in Big Bend National Park, and its story is stranger than it looks. We are in far west Texas, in the great southern curve of the Rio Grande that gives Big Bend its name. The Hot Springs Historic District sits on the north bank of the river, near the mouth of Tornillo Creek, in the southeastern corner of the park. Across the water is the Mexican state of Coahuila, close enough that you can hear roosters crowing from the far bank. The nearest town of any size is more than 100 miles away. It is January, the finest season for desert walking, and the afternoon is mild and bright. The trail begins at the end of a narrow dirt road and covers less than a mile, but it packs an astonishing amount into that distance. On one side rises a wall of cream-colored limestone, and on the other the floodplain drops away toward the green ribbon of the river. Reeds and rushes crowd the bank, fed by water in a land that hardly ever sees rain. The path itself was once a wagon track, then a resort promenade. Every few steps, another piece of the story appears. Big Bend National Park was established on June 12, 1944, the first national park in Texas. It protects just over 800,000 acres of desert, river, and mountain, one of the largest and most remote parks in the lower 48 states. The Rio Grande forms its southern boundary for roughly 118 miles, swinging through three great limestone canyons along the way. Few visitors ever reach this corner of the country. Those who do find one of the emptiest, quietest landscapes in North America. Here the trail squeezes beneath an overhanging cliff, and it is worth slowing down. The rock face is streaked with desert varnish, and in spring, mud nests of swallows cling beneath the ledges like rows of little clay jars. The stone itself is old sea floor, lifted and tilted into the sky. Run your eyes along the layers and you are reading pages of deep time. The river below is simply the latest chapter. Around 135 million years ago, this entire landscape lay beneath a warm, shallow sea. Limy ooze and countless shells settled on that sea floor, hardening into the thick limestone beds that now form the cliffs and canyons of Big Bend. The park is famous for the fossils locked in these rocks, from giant marine reptiles to dinosaurs that walked the later shorelines. When the sea withdrew and the land buckled upward, the limestone cracked along deep faults. Those cracks set the stage for the spring we are about to visit. The water at Langford Hot Springs begins as rain, some of it ancient, that soaked into the ground long ago. It sinks deep along fractures in the limestone, far enough down that the natural heat of the earth warms it. Pressure then drives it back up along a fault until it emerges beside the Rio Grande at a steady 105 degrees. The flow barely changes with the seasons, summer or winter, drought or flood. It is a reliable furnace in the middle of the Chihuahuan Desert, and life of every kind has always gathered around it. Ahead, the ruins of a settlement begin to rise out of the desert scrub. There is a long stone building with empty window frames, the shell of a store and post office. Nearby stand the remains of a motor court, small cabins that once welcomed travelers with iron bedsteads and painted walls. It seems impossible that anyone ran a business here, 100 miles from the railroad. To understand it, we need to meet Joseph Oscar Langford. In 1909, J.O. Langford was a young Mississippi man worn down by malaria he had carried since childhood. In a hotel in Alpine, Texas, he overheard talk of a healing hot spring far to the south, on the banks of the Rio Grande. Though he had never laid eyes on the place, he went to the land office and filed a homestead claim on it that very week. The law required 3 years of continuous occupancy, $300 in improvements, and a minimum bid of $1.50 an acre. Langford bet his health and his family's future on water he had never touched. Getting there was an expedition in itself. Langford set out from Alpine by wagon with his wife and his young daughter Lovey, trailing a milk cow behind them. The journey south covered rough desert track, dry creek crossings, and long waterless stretches, and it took the better part of a week. When they finally rolled down to the river, they found no resort and no town, just a hot seat beside the Rio Grande and mountains in every direction. Home would have to be built from scratch. Walking among these walls today, you can trace the outline of that homestead life. The Langfords raised an adobe house on the flat above the flood line, hauled their water, and planted what the desert would allow. Summer heat here regularly passes 110 degrees, and the river could rise overnight. Everything they used had to be grown, traded, or carried in by wagon. It was, by any measure, one of the loneliest addresses in the United States. The Langfords did not arrive to an empty riverbank. A Mexican farming family headed by Cleophas Natividad was already working the floodplain when they came, raising corn, squash, and beans in the rich river soil. The two households became good neighbors, sharing labor, food, and the small emergencies of frontier life. The Natividad children swelled the roll of the tiny school that was eventually taught on this bank. Cooperation, not solitude, is what made life here possible. Langford began his own treatment almost immediately, following the regimen local tradition prescribed. For 21 days he bathed in the hot spring and drank its mineral water, morning after morning. By the end of the course, the man who had arrived pale and feverish declared himself cured, his malaria gone. Whatever the medicine of it, his recovery convinced him utterly. If the spring could restore him, he reasoned, people would pay to let it restore them too. This long stone building was the heart of the little community, serving as store and post office. Mail came by horseback, collected on Mondays, and for years Langford himself served as the postman. Inside these walls, homesteaders and river families bought coffee, flour, and cloth, and caught up on news from a world weeks away. The post office gave the settlement an official name on the map, Hot Springs, Texas. Its window frames still look out on the same river bend. Down at the spring, Langford hired a stonemason named Herman Jacobs to build a proper limestone bathhouse over the source. Bathers paid 10 cents a day, or $2 for the full 21-day treatment. By 1912, Langford was advertising his health resort in the Alpine newspaper, promising the desert cure to anyone willing to make the journey. Guests soaked in the enclosed pool while the Rio Grande slid past a few feet away. The building is gone, but its foundation is the very tub people soak in today. Out here, one man had to be many things. Langford ran the baths and the post, taught school, and doctored his neighbors from both sides of the river with a home medical book in the spring itself. Families crossed the shallow fords for remedies, for mail, and for schooling. The river was less a border than a main street, with the settlement as its gathering place. For a few years, the enterprise prospered, and the desert outpost hummed with visitors. The trail now drops to the riverbank itself, and the destination comes into view. A neat rectangle of masonry sits right at the water line, brimming with clear, steaming water. Beyond its rim, the Rio Grande flows past, cold and green in January. The contrast is the whole attraction, 105 degrees inside the wall, a cool river current inches away. But before we get in, the story takes a hard turn. The Mexican Revolution reached even this remote bend of the river. From 1913 onward, raids and banditry along the border made life increasingly dangerous for scattered river settlements. The United States Army posted cavalry along the Big Bend, but the country was simply too vast to guard. In early 1916, the Langfords packed what they could and withdrew to El Paso for their family's safety. The bathhouse, the store, and the spring were left to the desert. Here it is, the old bathhouse foundation, now an open-air soaking pool. The water wells up through a hole in the stone floor, the very vent Langford built over more than a century ago. It arrives at 105 degrees, about the temperature of a very hot bath, and it never cools and never quits. Bathers today sit shoulder deep, where paying patients once took the cure. Few places let you soak inside a piece of history quite so literally. Langford did not give up on his spring. In 1927, after more than a decade away, the family returned to find the buildings battered but the water flowing as strongly as ever. He rebuilt the store and post office and added tourist cabins, a motor court for a new age of automobile travelers. Motorists now bumped down the desert road to take the waters where wagons had once struggled. The resort entered its liveliest years, just as talk of a national park began to stir. These cabin walls date from that second act, when Hot Springs was a genuine roadside destination. The store sold curios, cold drinks and supplies to bathers, ranchers, and travelers from both sides of the river. Neighbors from the Mexican villages traded candelilla wax and goods across the fords. A night in a cabin, a soak in the spring, and a sky full of stars made a package no city hotel could match. Fragments of the painted decoration can still be seen on some of the old plaster. Slipping into the pool is the payoff of the whole walk. The heat unknots every muscle within a minute, and the mineral water feels silky against the stone. In winter, bathers hop between the hot pool and the cold river and come out tingling. The park asks visitors to keep the water clean, skip soap and glass, and be mindful that the river current beyond the wall is genuinely dangerous. Treated with respect, it is one of the great free pleasures in the national park system. In 1942, with the park taking shape, the Langfords sold their land to the state of Texas. The site's final chapter belonged to Maggy Smith, who ran the store in Springs with her husband H. Baylor Smith until his death in 1944, and then alone until 1952. She became a legend of the river country, serving as merchant, midwife, and unofficial banker to families on both banks. Under her watch, the old resort remained a warm light in a very empty land. When she finally left, the settlement fell silent for good. Big Bend National Park was formally established on June 12, 1944. Assembled from ranch lands, homesteads, and river settlements like this one. The little post office had already closed by 1943, and the map name Hot Springs, Texas, faded into history. In 1974, the district was added to the National Register of Historic Places. The Park Service now preserves the store, the cabins, and the Bathhouse Foundation as a window into border homestead life. What was once a business became, simply, a story. Past the spring, the path runs right along the Rio Grande, and the far bank is another country. Cane and willow line the water, and herons stalk the shallows between the two nations. The river here is modest, wide and shallow, nothing like the barrier a map suggests. For most of this place's history, people, goods, and help moved back and forth across it freely. Walking beside it, the border feels less like a line and more like a seam. A few miles downstream sits Boquillas del Carmen, a small Mexican village that has been tied to this side of the river for generations. Its people once worked the mines and traded at stores like Langford's, and today they welcome park visitors who cross at the official port of entry. Beyond the village, the river enters Boquillas Canyon, slicing through a limestone wall over 1,000 feet high. Park and village share the same water, the same cliffs, and the same star-filled nights. The connection is as old as settlement itself. People knew this spring long before any homestead claim. On the limestone cliffs beside the trail, faded red pictographs mark the presence of native peoples who camped, cooked, and traded here over thousands of years, and hollows worn into the bedrock show where seeds and mesquite beans were ground. Archaeologists read this river mouth as a long-favored campsite, warm water and fresh water side by side. The park asks visitors to look without touching, as oils from hands destroy the ancient paint. Their long tenure deserves a quiet moment of respect on any walk through here. Near the springs, Tornillo Creek comes down out of the desert to meet the Rio Grande. Most of the year it is a broad gravel wash, dry as bone, but a single thunderstorm can turn it into a brown torrent within an hour. Its floods help bury and rework this floodplain again and again, which is one reason the ruins sit up on the higher ground. The creek drains a huge sweep of badlands rich in fossils. In the desert, even the empty riverbeds have stories. Big Bend protects the largest stretch of Chihuahuan desert landscape in the United States, and it is far from lifeless. More than 1,200 kinds of plants grow here, and over 450 species of birds have been recorded, more than almost any other national park. Water is the magnet, and a warm spring beside a river is the rarest prize of all. Vermilion flycatchers flash through the mesquite, and javelinas and coyotes leave their tracks in the mud. Every soak in the pool comes with a wildlife show. Past sunset and the desert delivers its final marvel. In 2012, Big Bend was named an International Dark Sky Park, with measurements showing the darkest night skies in the contiguous United States. On a moonless night, the Milky Way stands overhead like a lit road, bright enough to cast faint shadows. Bathers who linger in the hot water after dark float between a warm spring and 10,000 visible stars. Langford's guests saw the very same sky, and it has not dimmed since. Heading back along the cliff, the whole story lines up behind us: the sea that made the stone, the fault that heats the water, and the family that bet everything on it. The walk is short, well under a mile, yet it crosses 100 million years and a full century of borderland life. January light turns the limestone gold, and steam drifts off the pool by the river. Big Bend hides many wonders in its vastness. This little riverbank may be its warmest. If you make the long drive to Big Bend, give Langford Hot Springs an unhurried afternoon. Bring water, watch the heat in summer, and let yourself sit in that pool until the desert quiet settles in. 100 years ago, a sick man staked his life on this water, and it is still keeping its promise. Some places heal, and this one has the paperwork to prove it. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.